Hello, everybody, and welcome to a fresh recording of Chapter 3 here in the Essentials of Social Media Marketing. And we're going to try to get through this fairly quickly, even though there are a lot of different things to discuss. This is the latest 2025 version, and it's got a little bit more content than previous iterations. I think it is for the better. And we're going to look at two different things really today. One is the basic organic social media strategy. Then we're also going to look at the social media advertising strategy. And each has a variety of steps. Some we will discuss in more detail than others, but they do at first look very similar. There are some core differences that we will show, but right up front, we're going to go through the organic social media strategy first, and then you're going to look at the advertising strategy and think, wow, this is really similar. I kind of wish these were separated into separate chapters, but whatever. It's all one thing. So, as always, and as we, take off here, feel free to reach out with any questions that you might have as we go. These are the slides that come with the courseware. If you download them, though, you'll notice I omitted a significant amount. We're not going to talk about SEO in social media. That's not. I think if there's one thing to take out of this chapter, it's that. And we're not going to look at a ton of the examples that are present in the textbook. I like to provide a lot of examples just kind of as I go, but I had to cut down on slides somewhere, and that's what I opted for. All right. So as we go through here, I mean, of all the terms that you're going to see throughout this course, this one is probably one of the most important ones. That's the social media marketing strategy. It's pretty simple. Um, it's just, hey, this is how a company is going to incorporate social media into its business. That's kind of an overview of what it is, but it is different from a social media marketing plan. The social media marketing plan is actually a living document, and it's kind of, I consider it more of a strategy, but here it's defined as the living document that outlines an organization's social media goals. And when you think about goals, we're going to talk a little bit about what that entails. Um, but it's really kind of if you think of the strategy as how social media connects to an organization, social media plan is is like what the goals are and how you're going to get it. That's really the key differentiator there. The second point here is actually really important. And that's, hey, you got to be active on social media without a we have to be active on social media with a strategy. You might think that brands are out there just kind of going willy-nilly, and some of them are. But those that have a plan in place and are really sticking to it and um, are creating content and developing a brand voice around social media and the brand as they look online, those are the ones that are succeeding. Just kind of sharing everything that relates to the brand on social media, that's not a strategy. That's not a social media marketing plan. It's just putting content out there. And so we're going to go through the steps of a social media marketing strategy. And this is how you can avoid being the company online without a proper strategy. All right, so there's 10 steps. We're not going to go through all of them. They're all equally important, but we're really going to focus on a handful. And the first five all comes before you even determine which platform you're going to be talking about. This is really something where you are more in the planning stage, the first half of the steps, not just planning, but getting your house in order per se. This is where you determine, okay, what do we have already? Who are we working with? Who are we communicating with? And what is it that we want to be known for? And of course, what are the goals? The second five, that's where you come up with the platform based on what you come up with in steps 1 through 5. Or step 6 is the platform selection. And then from there, you are essentially executing your content strategy, as you can see. The last step happens after. That's where you analyze everything after you actually published it. It's an important one, but it's not one that is going to be necessary for any discussion posts or any sort of work that you would do in this class. And the one other thing on this is I'm not a huge fan of scheduling posts ahead of time unless you have a huge volume. So I would consider steps 1 through 8 being preparation, step 9 being execution, step 10 being the analysis. All right. These first 5 steps, I think we've gone through in at least one other course throughout your academic journey. So I'm going to go through them fairly quickly, but I think it's worth noting that, hey, if before you even select a platform, you got to figure out who your target audience is. And when I think about how this has worked in the past, a lot of times this strategy, this plan that we're walking through, this is assuming that you don't have anything set up, new business or no social media, which is kind of hard to believe any company would be without any social media presence. But the point stands that this is for a company that is starting from scratch, starting from nothing, has nothing. Most of you, if you're working in social media in the future, that's not going to be your situation. Your case is probably going to be analyzing what's already there and operating within the confines of where you already are, or potentially considering moving elsewhere. I have a handful of clients who I manage their social media for. And over the last 2 years, we have gone through a mass exodus from Twitter, or X. That process has been somewhat similar to the first 5 steps here. And that is, I firmly believed and to still believe that the company's audience, their target market, was not on that platform. And if they were, that was not the place for them to be consuming the brand's content. So, step 1 the idea is to create personas. I think most of us have come to understand what these are. This is where you give a name to a person and you kind of build out a human with a fake human, I should say, with all of their interests, motivations. And the more that you can build this person out and put a face to the name, you can better understand what their social media consumption habits are going to be like. And then you can then operate from that. Now, again, these are for the brand's customers. The second step here is where you shift from thinking about the audience, identifying your target audience, number 1. But number 2 is doing what they call social listening, which is just monitoring the online world to determine what's being said about the brand or a topic. Now this, you might think that this is, I've done tons of social media audits where I am auditing the brand's presence in terms of their accounts. The idea here is that, again, it's assumed that the brand doesn't have any presence on social media. Rather, you're starting from scratch. But the second step is figuring out, hey, what is the temperature like in terms of the discourse about either the brand, if it's big enough, or a topic that the brand is involved with, or the industry. And I look at these 2 slides, this one here, positive and negative sentiment about the brand. Chances are, if you're starting from scratch, there's no sentiment at all. Really, you want to think about that third point, which platforms are customers using the most? Because that's really where you want the answer. And in this evolving time here on social media, this question is probably more important than ever. And that's because 5 years ago, when I was teaching this course, there were big 4. It was Facebook, it was Twitter, it was Instagram, and to a degree, it was LinkedIn. That's it. 5 years later, Facebook is fading. Twitter is really going out of style fast for companies, and TikTok has emerged. LinkedIn has elevated itself. Instagram has become even more massive. And then you have all of these smaller platforms that are potentially a gold mine for a business. I've seen more and more content about Reddit. I've seen platforms that are trying to take over and fill the void left by Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads. And also there's always that kind of ugly stepchild of B2B brands on social media, that's Snapchat. B2B companies haven't really figured that out. It's become really a B2C haven, and where influencers are really dominant. And then you have the other one, is it a social network or not? YouTube. Those are all part of the discussion now. And the audit is really just boils down to figuring out where people are. And if your brand is big enough, is there any sort of chatter about the brand on any platforms that, for any reason, would lead you to having to take some action? That's really what to think about it. And again, if you're starting from zero, I don't think you're going to see a lot of that, which is why I really push at that third point. It says under step 2, and it'll say this in the book too, to conduct a social media audit by creating a spreadsheet. This is a very manual process. There are tons of tools that just do this for you now. I am going to skip through this. I also don't think you need to necessarily conduct a SWOT analysis. We go through all sorts of classic business school exercises here throughout this courseware, throughout this book. There's 2 in this chapter alone. The SWOT analysis is one that we can do without. If you are the one tasked with establishing a company's social media presence, a SWOT analysis is for the person who does not know what they're doing. It is for someone who doesn't understand social media, who doesn't understand the target audience, and who doesn't understand the content that will work in the industry and in the type of business where your company is. So I'm going to go past the SWOT analysis pretty quickly. I also think a SWOT analysis at this point in time, business students kind of have, at least from what I have seen, really kind of ingrained the SWOT analysis idea into their minds, where those are already kind of assumed and they're discussed. It's not something I'm going to spend any time with. But I do want to spend a minute here. And that is step 3. Step 3 is one of the more important ones. And it's something that will be all over any exam that I give, and will certainly come back in the analytics chapter at the end of the semester. And that is goals, objectives, and metrics. Now, I first want to establish what these are. Goals that you see on the left, that is the high level goal that you would put in a social media marketing plan. It is on its own not quantifiable, in terms of like just that. And it is something that does not have a defined end, which again, it kind of goes in the face of what an actual goal usually it's like something you're trying to get to something, but they have purposely left this ambiguous so that you are always trying to, in this case, increase brand awareness. There's usually only 2 goals. I have found 99% of businesses use social media for one of 2 things. If you're B2B, you're usually increasing brand awareness. If you're B2C, you're still usually increasing brand awareness, but some try to weaponize it on the organic side enough to increase sales and revenue. I personally think you need advertising on social media these days to do that. However, it is something that some businesses still strive for. Again, my own personal opinion, I do not like when organic social media's goals are to drive sales, because it turns your role as a social media person into being a salesperson. And it's not the same. For me, marketing and sales, they do intersect and they work in tandem a lot. But on social media, that is a brand awareness play. Um, you've got to be a massive brand with a massive following. And if you're starting from scratch, right? If you're starting a brand from zero, like we are in this example, it's got to be impossible to upstart on social media and suddenly, hey, I'm going to drive some sales for free. If that were the case, everybody would be doing it. And so, that's overall, there's a topic really for another day, but that's the goals, right? Increase brand awareness. The objectives are where you have numbers that you're trying to do. Not just numbers. Usually it's percentages like you see here. Grow Instagram followers by 150%. Increase engagements by 50% per post. Right? These are not live numbers. These are just percentages so that you can maintain these year over year. Like each year, strive to hit these goals. These are kind of lofty goals. I don't usually go for these, but especially at the sales. But that's what you're actually trying to improve. And so objectives are a set of KPIs, follower growth, engagement, website traffic, things like that. And again, it's got a number that you are trying to increase. Then we have metrics. That is these are pure numbers. These are for a defined period of time. How many new followers, how many likes, comments, and shares, how many page views per visitor. Again, that revenue thing, which I don't like. So the only non-number in these three boxes is the goal. Objectives, there is a number here, and then metrics is the number that's actually happening. So these are the numbers you observe. These objectives are the numbers you're going for. And altogether, those objectives lead to your goals. So that's pretty much it on that. It will come back in the analytics chapter. I just wanted to make sure that this was set forth here. All right. Here's another business school classic exercise, the SMART goals. It's funny, like they are supposed to be smart, but then you go back here and, those objectives are not very smart. They're a little ridiculous. I don't see many companies that are, maybe that's like over the course of a year, but even still, I don't think that's a good idea. So we're going to skip over the SMART goals. Let's go to step 4. And this is where you figure out who all is involved. I used to kind of skip over this one too until recently. The reason, for example, like the reason I have long assigned the content marketing courseware with the social media courseware is because too often people forget that social media is not just about the strategies and the best practices, but there is content that goes with it. Like there needs to be something to say. And a lot of times, whether you're a freelancer or you're a new hire or you're overseeing a team in social media, that means more than one person. It's very hard for one person alone to handle everything. And that is where you need to figure out the roles and responsibilities so that you know what those expectations should be. For example, say, before, and this is why this is important to figure out before the platform. If you don't have anybody to assist with graphics or photography and you don't have any visual assets, you need to know that up front because you either need to, one, find somebody to do it, or two, if you're not going to, then maybe Instagram's not the best platform for you. Secondly, when you think about the team of people that are involved, this is where you can appropriately set those expectations long term. If you're going to have 5 different people involved in a social media strategy for a brand that, again, does not exist in social media, that is good. You're putting a lot of resources in there. You can have a little bit loftier goals. You can have loftier objectives. But if there's one person and they're responsible for everything, then you need to temper those expectations a little bit. This last point I think is really interesting. This was not here in previous iterations of this courseware, and that is assigning whether to keep in-house or outsource. I am the outsourced person. I am the person that that some companies have come to for support with social media. Not just social media, but content strategy, content creation. And, this is important to know because this leads to what are the budget constraints? What exactly do you want to outsource? What do you want to keep in-house? And if you're the freelancer, it's important for you to know your roles. What exactly are you expected to do and what is the company going to provide and what are their resources and their roles and what are their responsibilities compared to your own? There are social media freelancers are a dime a dozen these days, but I mean, a freelancer is only as good as the resources and the team that are put around them by the company that hires them. So important step here. All right, step 5, you got to establish that tone of voice. This is figuring out how you're going to talk on social media. What exactly is it going to be? And there's some examples here, but I'm just going to jump to the classic that everybody talks about is Wendy's. Wendy's is not the only one. Burger King does this now too. McDonald's does it. All the major fast food chains they've all kind of adopted this tone of voice. And Wendy's, I think, was the first one. It was just on Twitter. I personally don't like the example. However, it is a good point to show when you're looking at tone of voice, right? It is an extension of a very well-known brand, fast food, I might add, where their number one goal is just the attention. It's not serious. I don't even think it's actually that clever. But it's something that captures attention. So it has helped grow a brand in ways that any of these other brand voices would not have been able to do. And I mean, we are at a point too where you're seeing other brands that are leaning into this. Duolingo is the number one example. I have a case study on that. But then also Nutter Butter even kind of went off the deep end and has really embraced the absurdity of social media because the end goal is not necessarily to grow the brand. It's just to deliver compelling and entertaining content to a community and to build an engaged community so that when they see that brand come across the top, yeah, sure, they may see the Nutter Butter name, but they're going to think of something else. In the back of their mind, Nutter Butter is still right there in their mind so that when they're at the checkout counter, they look down at all the candies, they might be a little bit more inclined to pick up that red packaged peanut buttery snack rather than a Snickers or a Milky Way. All right, we're at number 5. I'm going to try to keep moving here, but this is where you pick the platform. There are lots of options. I've outlined most of these. The only one I didn't really talk about yet was Pinterest. All the other ones I've mentioned at some point today. I don't necessarily agree with all this, but it is what it is. I personally think the platform selection is dependent on your audit. I don't think you should let this graphic tell you what to do, but they do have this graphic here, and some of these are good. I would actually argue that none of these are ideal for Facebook, but again, I'm not for me to decide here. It's an interesting idea. I recommend you just use this graphic as a brainstorming tool and like a starting point. If the stuff that you are seeing through your own audit proves some of these points differently and you decide, wow, yeah, there is a spot for retail on LinkedIn, which that could be tough to do, then go for it. Give it a shot. You should have let your own findings and your own research help guide your decisions. I'm going to pretty quickly skip over this one. This is creating your social media accounts. You can walk through it pretty quickly. And hey, if you're watching this, you've probably created a social media account before. Just make sure you fill out all the important sections and everything is optimized in terms of photos, banner images, and links. All right, distribution and content strategy. I purposely brought this up because I think it is bad. Do not follow these recommendations. Do not at all think that these are the answers, because they are not. Maybe Instagram stories, you could do up to 7 per day. Great. Tweets, sure, you could do a ton. LinkedIn, companies should never be posting more than once per day. Facebook, companies should never be posting once a day. Pinterest, whatever, you can do as many as you want. TikToks, I think you can do 1 to 4, but you could also do more. I would never ask anybody this on an exam, but also, again, this is a preference for the brand, and these numbers need to be guided by the analytics. I used to run a LinkedIn page for a company a couple years ago, and they asked me to post twice per day. And I said, I think the algorithm is going to really shut down that second post every day, or it's going to stop the first post from reaching an audience. For a couple of weeks, I posted twice a day. We did not have enough content to post twice a day. Once we got to a point where I was reporting, I said, hey, if you look at this trend, every single post that was the second post of the day did significantly worse than the early post. I came back around. Marketing director looked at me and finally said, okay, you can go down to once a day. Even then, once a day was very much dependent on the content that was shared and the times it was posted. You need to let the analytics, but also the content strategy, which is this next step, or I guess it's part of this step, really guide your timing. If there's nothing to say, you're better off just not saying anything than trying to stretch and spend all these resources and time trying to find something that you think might be applicable. Chances are it's not going to be consumed by anybody. It's not going to be engaged with by anybody. It's just going to fall flat. You look at the content strategy and they give one slide to this. I think this is incredibly important. And that is what the content marketing chapters are for. It is what, all of the lecture slides on content marketing are for. That the content strategy needs to work in tandem with social media. Trying to take a white paper and just turning around and posting it to social media is a recipe for disaster. All right, taking testimonials and just blank, like most testimonials are overly corporate. Nobody's going to care about those on social media. And if you put them on the wrong platform, if you put a customer testimonial on Facebook for a B2B, I don't know, construction company, that is going to fall on deaf ears. And so there is absolutely a way to go about this in terms of creating your distribution and content strategy here. It is not just pick a bunch of existing content. You need to be very intentional with the stuff that you share, and you need to ask yourself, hey, is my audience actually going to care about this? Are they going to get any value from this whatsoever? You got to remember, on social media, every platform, and now including LinkedIn, people are not there to see business stuff. LinkedIn even has become more of a professional development tool. And I guess of all the platforms, that's probably the best bet. But that's not the place to be when you're sharing business material. And so you need to find a way to merge business and fun together on social media, or else it's never going to work. That's something that is not talked about much in this book. And it's something that I think a lot of companies still lack. And so finding the proper combination is really where you can succeed for a brand on social media. I'm going to skip over the content calendar. Planning out too much content on social media is going to look disingenuous, inauthentic, but whatever. I mean, it is good to create a social media calendar, I should say, but not schedule all your posts ahead of time. But you do want to have some themes. And if you have any major announcements coming up, press releases, important things to include, like a company picnic or something, you do want to mark those down so that you first can save the space for that, but then also you can plan ahead and possibly create content ahead of time, figure out how you can get the most out of content afterwards, posting it a couple of extra times, things like that. I'm going to skip over this one. I do like social management tools. I am a big fan. I mean, Hootsuite their price has gone through the roof recently. So if you can afford it, go for it. I think Sprout's fine too. I've used its Sprinkler. There's an L missing in there, but some of these are really good tools. They do a lot of automation for you, especially in the way of analytics. So consider that. They also have AI writing tools, but I'm very lukewarm on those. I think the Owly and Hootsuite, it's getting better. It's improved over the last 18 months, and I think it's a good thing that you can use if you have writer's block and you're out of things to talk about. Last step. Hey, this is track, analyze, and tune. They define tuning as the continuous process of adjusting and improving social media marketing plan. Okay, that's great. Always be measuring. That is what social media is great for, is that you always have access to all sorts of data, and you can look at it on a post by post basis, and you can really, really do well with it. All right. Last part for this first half. Today, there are 4 big things to also add in, kind of themes to add in. One is storytelling. That is not just saying that you're doing something, but showing it. The classic show, don't tell writing technique that we talk about that you learned in 9th grade. Those are some examples. 2 is having some context where each platform can have a different type of sort of content that tells the same story. And this is a good example where it says Instagram, high quality visuals with motivational captions, but then TikTok is shorter and energetic. That is one, based on how the platform algorithms work, but then 2, also consider who your audience is on those different platforms. Third one is just kind of the major strategies that are popular today. Augmented reality is cool, where there's all sorts of trending filters and things that you can use. That's mainly on TikTok and Instagram, not really anywhere else. But then also on LinkedIn, there's trending types of posts, trending topics, trending people, trending influencers, and types of user-generated content. AI, well, I don't see why that's there, but it's important to think about what's trendy, what's relevant today. Last step, and then we'll take a pause, is that there is a really interesting dichotomy today between personal and professional on social media. They are further apart today than they ever have been before. But at the same time, you have YouTubers and influencers who are people trying to sound more professional. The key theme in all of this is that you need to have some authentic engagement. And the step that I'm adding here is that it's time for brands to start engaging with other posts. That means not just liking, but leaving comments, showing that that brands are looking at people, not just the other way around. You can do this consistently and you start to get some attention. That is how you can build an engaged audience that understands and values your brand. When you start from zero, engaging with other posts is going to be really important. Social media is not a one-way street. It's something to constantly work on and constantly try to keep doing and building trust. So we'll take a pause here. I'm already at over a half an hour. I will have a second video on social media advertising to come soon. And yeah, for any questions, feel free to reach out.